Kevin is very talented, but I don't know if it's going to be him, but he's a very talented guy.
Hey, it's Kevin. Time to talk about what Trump just said in the last 15 hours, not only at his Iowa speech, but also afterwards, where he gave us some insights into tariffs, along with some information that we got on tariffs this morning from the European Union, from the Italian Prime Minister, and more. Quick spoiler, Italian Prime Minister in talks and EU negotiations still not going well, just 5 days ahead of July 9th. But first, let's hit some of Trump's comments in the last 15 hours. Donald Trump, in his speech, talks about how he was asked for permission for Iran to fire 14 rockets at us and our air bases in the Middle East, saying it's fine, that they respect us so much that they gave us a heads up. Well, in fairness, also, they probably would have gotten obliterated if they, actually obliterated, if they injured a single American in the process. That said, it is worth noting that the IAEA just withdrew all of their nuclear weapons inspectors and just nuclear inspectors in general, nuclear material inspectors, uranium inspectors, enrichment facility inspectors. All of them have been withdrawn and sent back to Vienna out of Iran. The IAEA posted that all have been removed safely, and now we don't have any inspectors at all in Iran, which, keep in mind, if you haven't yet seen my video on Pyramid Mountain, you might consider searching on YouTube Meet Kevin Pyramid Mountain, where we break down that just outside of the Natanz facility is a completely untouched uranium enrichment facility, potentially with thousands of centrifuges. Anyway, Donald Trump then jumped into talking about expanding a modernization for air traffic controllers, boasting of $15 billion going to air traffic control modernization. I'm a big fan of this as a pilot. He also talks about expanding school choice. Now, we don't have all of the answers on exactly how this is going to work yet, but inside this over 900-page bill, there was an established voucher program deduction. Now, this sounds really complicated, but just think about it like this. Let's say somebody creates an entity. I don't know, let's call it School Hack for giggles. So School Hack exists. And School Hack says, hey, if you donate $10,000 to School Hack, we'll give you a free voucher to go to this private school or charter school or school of your choice. Basically, a vehicle or a conduit gets established to where your payment for a child's tuition becomes tax deductible at likely the federal level. I'm not sure that states will be very happy about that. And then you could send your child to school for potentially 30 to 40% off because you're taking a deduction on that investment and you're guiding where you want your child to go to school. Now, it's exactly unclear how this will all be established, but it basically enables people to have school choice. Now, traditional proponents of school choice basically say that the money that we spend in property taxes for public schools should be allocated the way we want. So we should just say like, hey, we pay property taxes, every child gets $2,000 per year or whatever it is to go to a school. Here's that $2,000. If you want to spend it on a public school, you can. If you want to spend it on a charter school, if you want to spend it on a private school, you can. If you want to add to that, great. But you get a voucher of $2,000 if you want your child to go to a different school. This basically gives parents more freedom to dictate where their children can go to school. The problem with this, and why it's deemed typically unpopular, is that if everybody chooses to go to the more successful schools because people with more money are able to support those schools, then the potentially more wealth-backed children go to a school with more means and everybody else gets sort of left behind. And you basically concentrate poverty in one school, which could potentially affect learning outcomes, and concentrate higher learning outcomes, potentially with more money, more resources at more rich children's schools, right? That's sort of the argument. This is a little different because it's kind of a tax deduction at a federal level, which means technically you're not reallocating local property tax revenue, but you're still creating a conduit for parents to get a deduction for sending their children to charter schools, private schools, or schools, I suppose, of their choice, where money kind of dictates where admissions are possible. Very well. This gives us a little bit of clarity on what's going on, though it's still entirely to be determined what all of the details of this will be. Additionally, we heard from Donald Trump that, and this was sort of an off-the-cuff remark, that he wants to get rid of property taxes, which is really interesting because that's totally something that's run by states. and not the federal government. So I don't know if that was just sort of like an off-the-cuff comment or promise. But then again, during his campaign, when he sort of off-the-cuff promised things like no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips, and no taxes on Social Security, we did end up getting big pieces that sort of lower at least taxes on a portion of overtime, tips, and Social Security income for those various different groups. So who knows what he's got up his sleeve. Donald Trump talks about putting farmers in charge if they work with people who are good people, who are hard workers but are undocumented. One of his sort of cabinet members followed up and said that we're working on an H-2A streamlined visa program to make it easier for these workers to have some form of seasonal worker visa. So that way we can get to having 100% legal workers, even if they're seasonal / undocumented-ish, legal, not legal-ish workers. Also details to be determined. Very kind of common, a lot of new information, a lot of new things happening very quickly. Donald Trump then suggested that we might end up next year planning a UFC fight on the grounds of the White House, a championship fight put together by Dana White and UFC. This would be as part of the Great American Fair, which would start in Iowa, he said, and would be about celebrating America 250 and some form of really large nationwide fair that ends up culminating in the National Mall, which is in D.C. Unclear if this is like something you kind of intend to go to like multiple different locations with or what. Sounds interesting, but that would be a next year thing anyway. He does briefly talk about Mamdani in his talk, says we will not allow communism or Marxism in America. Then talks about ending the EV mandate, this requirement that states wanted to be all electric and sell no more ICE vehicles as of 2035. Donald Trump then says on tariffs that we will be sending out letters starting potentially today. We're sending out 10 to 12 letters on the 4th, so today, followed by the 9th. Every country will have gotten their letters. And these letters will institute tariffs of between 10 and 20%, potentially as high as 60 to 70%. Now, Donald Trump also says he wants to keep it reasonable, which is a walk back from the panic that we saw during Liberation Day, which sounds good, but it also remains to be seen how damaging now larger tariffs could be, especially since they won't actually take effect until August 1st, which is actually a de facto delay, right? If, we're supposed to have the 90-day period end July 9th, but we're actually not instituting tariff collection until August 1st, it's basically a de facto 3-week extension, which means if tariffs don't actually start taking effect August 1st, you don't potentially see the effect of these larger tariffs until maybe September, October, November. This seems to be a very much kick the can down the road tariff situation, which unfortunately is kind of the same playbook that we saw in 2018. We negotiated with China for over 2 years, tariff deals. We never got a deal done, and it wasn't until COVID that we ended up just settling on something because we were focused on COVID. The European Union this morning came out and suggested that they also have been unable to reach a deal, that they would continue negotiations over the weekend, hoping to secure a deal. And they're looking to secure a pause, worst case scenario, if they can't get a deal together. And so far, they're willing to reduce their countermeasures of tariffs down to 72 billion euros from 95. However, the EU is now being threatened with a 17% tariff by the US on European food. This is happening at the same time as we're hearing talk that the Chinese are not having the best luck negotiating with Europe either, which is also kind of interesting because it shows that there are still issues between China potentially flooding even the European market with too many assets or products that they want to sell, and Europeans are kind of stuck in this place of like, okay, what side do we choose, the Chinese or the US? But oh crap, if we side with the Chinese, we kind of start seeing the problems that the US has been complaining about for quite a while when it comes to these tariffs. Who knows? Either way, these letters are coming out. They're going to be imminent. Some people believe that this is why we're starting to see a symbiotic sort of, Bitcoin or Ethereum slowdown. We've seen Bitcoin drop just about $2,000 since some of this talk. We've also seen Ethereum give up some of its Ethereum treasury plan, like a Michael Saylor MicroStrategy plan. We've seen Ethereum basically give up all of those gains and fall back under that very, very critical 2,500 line. Although, I did notice in the after hours yesterday, which obviously we're not going to get updated numbers on now, but Symbiotic held up its 13% gains yesterday, which was the big pitch in our alpha report yesterday morning before it even moved off of the line, which is pretty awesome. Okay, that said, what else did we get from Donald Trump? Well, we get some more commentary on the big, beautiful bill. Here's some information that I put in the Meet Kevin app, which you could download for free at, you just type it into the Apple or Android App Store. But you can see it under the news tab. I put these notes in here and these charts. I think this is an interesting breakdown of sort of where the money is going and where the revenues are coming from. So you could pause and kind of take a look at this if you want. Obviously, tax cuts being the biggest increase in deficit. It is worth noting that right here, this is a chart that I think is a little bit biased because the Biden infrastructure law, when it was originally passed, was only expected to cost $384 million. It's the Inflation Reduction Act. But Goldman Sachs actually believed it could cost as much as $1.3 trillion, which would put it more where my mouse is over here, which, is obviously a lot more than what they're showcasing here because of loose Treasury Department interpretations of what vehicles or assets would end up qualifying for credits, which I think is very interesting. Because here they're basically trying to say that Republicans increase the deficit the most. Honestly, it's probably not totally untrue, though. I'm actually a big believer that politicians are just always going to spend more money as much as they try their best to cut money sometimes. I actually don't think that's like a huge priority for all politicians because most of the time they gain more votes by spending money and cutting taxes for people. That said, the Wall Street Journal has a piece that kind of shows you the danger of fighting with politicians. And the Wall Street Journal says, Elon Musk lost to Trump and Elon just can't get over it. And basically what they say is that, hey, with politics, you have to be able to sometimes just like go with the flow. And Elon Musk is so caught up in this idea that this is terrible. We're increasing the debt. This is a big pork party is what the Republicans are. And, basically they say Elon Musk digs himself deeper into a hole because he's fighting politicians that just by virtue of being politicians always expand the debt. So this is where Elon's like, what good is Doge saving $160 billion when this bill increases the debt ceiling by $5 trillion? It makes a mockery of the work. Right. So this is very much a common sentiment right now, and it sort of aligns with Elon Musk talking about this idea of creating a third party, which also is somewhat interesting because Elon Musk is now doubling down on this idea that, hey, if we make a third party, we don't actually need the party to do more than take control of maybe 2 or 3 Senate seats or 8 to 10 House districts. And the reason for this is Elon Musk would want to target sort of that middle swing vote, like I personally think the Kyrsten Sinema, the Joe Manchin type, maybe not so much the Tom Massey because he's kind of leaned on one side, but he could be seen as a hedge against Republican spending. And it's unclear if this would actually function, but Elon Musk certainly has enough money to bankroll some of these campaigns, so it could happen. It's very interesting. And I think it is astute of Elon to realize that the party's not going to be big enough to actually get big votes to get a lot of seats. And so he just wants to focus on getting enough seats. In this case, you'd really have to just focus on, people, educating people on, hey, if you're going to vote Republican, make sure you vote for this particular person when you go down your ballot, like when there's a presidential election or something, which usually people don't change what they vote on the ballot. Like when they go down, it's like, oh, I'm going to go all Republican, and they just go down the list, go all Republican, or all Democrat, and they go down the list, all Democrat, right? It's definitely an uphill battle, but you can kind of see some of that frustration going on. As far as the economic benefits of the bill, it does seem like there's pretty much an agreement amongst all of these sort of different models that in 2026 and 27, we are going to see an increase to GDP of 0.5% to 1%. And there are obviously different opinions on how much, but whatever our GDP is, assume it would be about 0.5% to 1% higher than what it would be without this bill, with only a potential negative coming in 2033 to 34 per our Yale model over here. I don't know that really matters much, though. What matters more is, like, are we going to prevent seeing some form of, layoff surge? If there's some kind of surge in layoffs, that sort of growth might not be enough. But The hope is that CapEx spending that's being driven by this bill and people being able to write off things like machinery or aircraft or whatever in full via 100% bonus deductions, which is great for businesses, mind you. I think the idea is that those sort of deductions would help this economy keep moving and keep hiring and spending. So far we've got 90 days into trade and tariff negotiations. We've got one deal with a surplus country and one deal with a deficit nation. So obviously a little bit of work remains to be seen. So this gives us sort of an overall idea of what Trump just said in the last 24-ish hours here.
Bullish catalyst.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.